The night the president called Ed Sullivan. Minutes before air, what he asked left Ed shaking. Those words may sound dramatic, but they are not exaggeration, because on one quiet Sunday night, just minutes before America's favorite show went live, Ed Sullivan, the man who never froze, never broke, never lost control, was handed a message that stopped him cold. It wasn't from a sponsor. It wasn't from CBS. It was from the President of the United States, calling through a private line that almost no one knew existed. What the President asked for wasn't political. It wasn't about ratings or a guest or even the show itself. It was something far more human and far more urgent, a request so personal that Ed's hands began to tremble as he listened. Most people today have never heard what happened next, but those who were there say it was the first time they saw America's unshakable host look frightened and then make a choice live television was never built to handle. Because on that night, Ed Sullivan didn't just run a show. He faced a moment that would test whether he valued the script or his humanity. On that winter evening, CBS Studio 50 felt as steady and familiar as a heartbeat. For more than a decade, Sunday nights had carried the same quiet music, the shuffle of stagehands laying tape, the warm buzz of lights rising to full power, the low hum of an audience settling into their seats like families gathering around their own living room television sets. Nothing about this night suggested it would be different, and for Ed Sullivan, who lived inside routine the way most people live inside memory, that was a comfort. He arrived hours before airtime, coat collar turned up against the New York cold, carrying his clipboard pressed to his chest. The crew knew the ritual well. Ed would walk the edge of the stage, tracing invisible lines with his eyes, reviewing every cue card like a man studying a sacred text. To him, the show was more than entertainment. It was order in a world constantly shifting under the weight of politics, culture, and an America growing more restless by the year. Tonight's broadcast had been planned down to the second. A young comedy duo was set to open. A trained SEAL act would bring laughter to the middle segment. The final spot belonged to a rising Broadway singer with a voice that could make a whole room sit still. Nothing controversial, nothing unexpected, just the kind of wholesome variety show millions of families trusted, week after week. Behind the scenes, technicians prepared the camera rails, tightening bolts by instinct, the orchestra tuned with quiet discipline. In the control room, the familiar glow of dials and screens created a sense of safety, as if the studio itself had learned to breathe in rhythm with Ed's calm authority. To the outside world, this was just another Sunday, but those inside the building felt something subtle in the air, a tension without a name, the feeling that some unseen thread of fate was being pulled taut. Ed didn't see it yet. His posture was firm, his expression set in the same professional stillness viewers knew so well. His job was simple: hold the country's attention for an hour, bring a little joy into homes that needed it, and end the night with dignity intact. He had done it thousands of times without faltering, but in the final minutes before airtime, as stagehands hurried past him and orchestra members adjusted their sheet music, a single message quietly approached, one that would slip into the room like a cold wind and change everything he thought he could control. The first sign that something was wrong came from the edge of the backstage corridor, where a junior assistant stood holding a pale yellow phone slip between trembling fingers. She had been trained never to interrupt Ed in the final countdown. In Studio 50, those last minutes were considered sacred ground, but the color drained from her face as she read the small block of writing again and again, as if trying to make her eyes believe what they were seeing. She hurried toward the stage manager, whispering the message like a confession. He frowned, took the slip, and scanned it twice before muttering, "That can't be right." The words were simple, but their weight was unmistakable. For a moment, the stage manager simply stared at the note. Presidents didn't call minutes before national broadcasts. They didn't dial into variety shows. They certainly didn't ask to speak privately with the host. The strangeness of it clung to the air, heavy and unsettling. Ed was reviewing the introduction for the opening act when the stage manager approached. He stepped carefully as if carrying porcelain. "Ed," he whispered, "I think you need to take this." He handed the slip to him with both hands, the way one hands over news that can't be softened. Ed read it once. His eyebrows rose, not dramatically, but enough for the closest stagehand to later recall the moment with perfect clarity. Ed Sullivan, the unshakable figure of American television, looked startled. It was the tiniest crack, yet unmistakable. After all, the man had announced the Beatles, Elvis Presley, and countless world stars without so much as a tremor. He lowered the slip slowly. "This must be an error," he said with a steady voice that didn't match the tension behind it. "The president doesn't call here." Routine urged him to ignore it. The red on-air bulb was less than 3 minutes from lighting. The orchestra was warming its first sustained note. The comedy duo was already waiting behind the curtain. Every instinct he possessed told him to stay focused. But the White House operator did not disconnect. A second assistant approached, headset on, eyes wide. "Mr. Sullivan, they're still holding. They say it cannot wait." Something shifted inside him, a recognition that professionalism alone wouldn't settle this. Ed exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Put the call through," he said. And in that moment, the careful machinery of the show took its first step toward the unknown. The phone felt heavier than it should have, as if the gravity of the moment had settled into the metal. Ed held it to his ear with a steadiness he did not feel. On the other end, the White House operator's voice was gentle but firm, the kind of tone used only when the matter being delivered is more human than official. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "the president is on the line for you." A soft click followed, and then a voice that every American could recognize, even through a thin telephone wire. Calm, youthful, unmistakably direct. "Ed, thank you for taking this. I won't keep you long." In the control room, no one knew why Ed had stepped away from his mark. No one imagined that, at that exact second, the leader of the free world was speaking to the host of a variety show. Ed himself struggled to make sense of it. He straightened, searching for the professionalism that had carried him through decades of live television. "Yes, Mr. President. How can I help you?" What came next unfolded slowly, piece by delicate piece. The president explained that a letter had reached the White House earlier that afternoon, a letter written by the parents of a 9-year-old boy fighting for his life in a hospital bed. The child was gravely ill. Doctors were honest about his chances. The president paused, choosing each word with a care that made Ed's throat tighten. The boy, he said, had one comfort left in his small world: watching the Ed Sullivan Show every Sunday night, every week, without fail. It was the one thing he still looked forward to. "And today," the president continued, "he told his parents he had one last wish. He hoped, just once, to hear you say his name on television." Ed's first instinct was the old one, the instinct of a man who had lived his entire professional life inside the boundaries of timing sheets and sponsor agreements. A mention like that required planning, approval, a place in the rundown. "Perhaps," he began carefully, "we could do something next week." The president interrupted, but not unkindly. His voice softened in a way that needed no explanation. "Ed, I'm afraid he doesn't have until next week." The words sank into Ed like a stone, dropping into deep water. The studio noise, the orchestra melody, the footsteps behind him. Everything blurred. In that moment, the show he'd built his life around felt suddenly small. The line went quiet for a moment after the president's words. Ed held the receiver against his ear, but it no longer felt like a telephone. It felt like a weight pressing into his hand. Beyond the curtain, a stagehand called out the 2-minute warning, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if coming through thick glass. The president spoke again, quieter this time. "I know this is unusual. I know what I'm asking, but tonight he's watching from his hospital bed. He may not make it through the week. His parents say he hasn't smiled in days. Ed, could you give him this moment?" Ed did not answer right away. His mind raced through every rule he had lived by. The Ed Sullivan Show was built on discipline, on planning, on control, on the belief that a broadcast once set in motion was a machine too delicate to touch. Deviating from the script could anger sponsors, confuse performers, or throw an entire live hour into chaos. For most of his career, Ed had believed that his greatest duty was to the program. But now, another duty stood in front of him, one with a human face. A 9-year-old boy who might not live to see another Sunday. He swallowed hard. "Mr. President." "I'll do it." The president's reply was simple. "Thank you, Ed. Truly." A soft click ended the call, but the words stayed with him, pulsing like a heartbeat. The stage manager signaled frantically. 30 seconds. Ed moved toward the curtain on instinct, though his legs felt strangely heavy. A violinist in the orchestra later said she saw something in his expression she had never seen before. Not fear, not nerves, but a kind of trembling resolve, as if he were carrying someone else's hope in his hands. The curtain opened. The red light blinked on. America watched their familiar host step into the frame with the same upright posture and steady gaze they had trusted for years. But inside, Ed's composure was hanging by a thread. The first part of the show unfolded as planned. A joke landed. A musical cue slipped neatly into place. Yet every second, Ed felt the weight of the boy's name pressing against his heart. Then came the moment. Midway through the broadcast, Ed paused. Not a planned pause, not a theatrical beat. A real pause, the kind that empties a room. He looked straight into the camera, and for the first time in his career, he abandoned the script. "There's a young boy watching tonight," he began softly. His voice cracked, and in that instant, the unbreakable host finally broke. For a moment, nothing stirred inside Studio 50. No laughter, no applause, not even the soft rustle of programs shifting in audience hands. Ed's voice drifted into that silence like a fragile thread, carrying the weight of a child he had never met, yet suddenly felt responsible for. He spoke the boy's name slowly, almost reverently, as though speaking it aloud might wrap itself around the child's small, flickering hope. Performers waiting in the wings exchanged glances. Some bowed their heads. The orchestra conductor lowered his baton. Those who were there later said the atmosphere felt holy, a word seldom used to describe live television. It was as if the entire country was holding its breath at once. Ed tried to continue the introduction for the next act, but the sentence dissolved on his tongue. His lips trembled, his eyes glistened. A brief, unguarded tremor passed through him, the kind that a lifetime of professionalism had always kept hidden. Millions of viewers at home saw it. No camera cut away. No director dared to interrupt. It was the first time America witnessed Ed Sullivan not as a host, not as a figure of control, but as a man. When the show resumed, it carried a different energy. Performers softened their routines. A singer added a quiet dedication before her number. Even the comedians stepped gently, shaping their jokes with uncommon tenderness. Everyone seemed to be performing for someone far beyond the studio. A little boy lying in a hospital bed, watching the glow of the screen with fragile eyes. Within minutes, phone lines across the country lit up. CBS operators struggled to keep pace as hundreds of calls poured in. Prayers, messages, offers to help, strangers asking for the boy's address just to send a card. By morning, the network would be buried under thousands of letters, many written by parents who hugged their children a little closer that night. 3 days later, word reached CBS that the boy had passed away peacefully, his parents at his side. On his nightstand rested a single envelope. Inside was a short note Ed had written after the broadcast, a simple message of courage and love, addressed to a very brave young man. Ed never spoke publicly about the call. The president never mentioned it again. But within the CBS halls, that night became legend. The moment their famously rigid host chose compassion over format, heart over routine. In a profession built on control, Ed discovered something deeper, that the most powerful moments in television history aren't the perfectly timed ones, but the moments when someone chooses to be human,